The year is 2022. The place is the Piedmont Farmers Co-op. It smells like dust and fertilizer, like it always has. Frank Henderson sits behind his father's old desk. He is 73 years old. The paperwork is piled high. A young woman stands before him. She is not from around here. You can tell by her shoes. You can tell by the way she holds her phone, like it's a tool, not a distraction. She has a question, a simple one. She is looking for a farmer, a man named Silas Blackwood. Frank Henderson leans back in his chair. The leather creaks, a sound he has heard his whole life. Blackwood, he says. Sure, I know the family. What do you need from Silas? The woman smiles, a professional smile. We need his grapes, she says. Frank almost laughs. His what? His Muscadines. We need all he can sell us. Frank Henderson stares at her. He has run this co-op for 40 years. He took it over from his own father. He knows every farmer in 3 counties. He knows their debts. He knows their yields. He knows what the market will bear. And he knows Muscadines. Thick-skinned, full of seeds. An old-timer's grape. Something you eat off the vine in September. Not something you sell. Not for real money. Ma'am, he says, his voice patient, kind. I think you've been misinformed. Nobody grows those commercially. Not anymore. They're not worth the trouble. The woman's smile doesn't waver. She holds up her phone. On the screen is a magazine article. A glossy, beautiful picture of a cocktail glass. The headline reads, "The secret ingredient in America's best new gin." Frank squints to read the text below. He sees the name of a distillery, one he's never heard of. He sees words like terroir and phenolic complexity. He sees his county's name, and then he sees the sentence that makes him go silent. The unique, tannic bite comes from a rare heirloom muscadine, the Blackwood Scuppernong, grown exclusively by Silas Blackwood and purchased for $9 a pound. $9 a pound. The room is quiet. The only sound is the hum of the soda machine. Frank Henderson reads the number again. $9. He looks at the woman. He looks at the phone. And then he remembers a day, a lifetime ago. A young man, barely 20, his face smudged with dirt, standing in this very spot. A wooden crate of those same grapes at his feet. And he remembers the words he said to that young man. The kindest, most sensible words he could offer. Son, this is pig feed. This channel tells the stories of people who were told no. People who were written off. People who looked at a world that had no place for them and decided to build their own. If you believe those stories matter, if you believe that the quietest voices are often the most powerful, subscribe to this channel. Because what happened to Silas Blackwood is more than a story about grapes. It's a story about what grows in the ground that people have given up on. And it's a story about the devastating power of certainty. Let's go back. Back to 1992. Silas Blackwood stood in the yard of his family's farm. It wasn't much of a farm anymore, just 88 acres of tired land. A house that needed paint, a barn that leaned a little too far to the east. His father had died 2 months before. A heart attack in the field. Quick, quiet, just like the man himself. He left Silas the land, and the debt. A lot of debt. The bank owned most of it. The equipment dealer owned the rest. Silas was 20 years old. He knew one thing: farming. But he had no money for seed, no money for fertilizer, no money for fuel. He had the land, and he had the vines. Behind the barn on a southern-facing slope, 2 acres of muscadine grapevines, planted by his grandfather, tended by his father. They were wild things, thick, gnarled trunks that twisted like old men's arms. The neighbors laughed at them, called them the Blackwood Folly. Why waste good land on sour grapes? But Silas's father had loved them. He'd walk the rows in the evening, He'd check each vine. He never said much about it. He wasn't a man for speeches. But Silas knew. Those vines were the heart of the place, the one thing that was truly theirs. In late August, the grapes came ripe. They were dark purple, almost black, covered in a pale, dusty bloom. Silas picked them himself, for 3 days from sunup to sundown. He filled an old wooden crate, the one his grandfather had built. He loaded it into his beat-up Ford truck, and he drove to the Piedmont Farmers Co-op. He believed he had something valuable, something unique. He was about to learn what the world thought of his inheritance. Frank Henderson was 33 years old then, ambitious, smart. He'd gone to college for agricultural business. He came back home to modernize the co-op. He was a good man, coached Little League, served on the church board. He genuinely wanted to help the farmers in his county succeed. Success meant efficiency. It meant modern crops. It meant listening to the market. When Silas Blackwood walked in, Frank felt a pang of sympathy. He'd known Silas's father, a good man, but a poor farmer, stuck in the old ways. Now here was the son, trying to sell a crate of Muscadines. Frank walked over and looked into the crate. He picked up a grape, rolled it between his fingers. The skin was like leather. He sighed, the kind, patient sigh of a man who has to deliver bad news. "Silas," he said, "good to see you. Sorry about your dad." Silas nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson. I brought these in, hoping to sell them." Frank looked at the young man's hopeful face. He hated this part of the job. "Son," he said gently, "what do you think these are worth?" Silas hesitated. "I don't know. They're good grapes, real sweet." Frank shook his head slowly. "There's no market for these, Silas. Not for table grapes. The skin's too tough, too many seeds. The wineries want Concord or something finer. These are an old-timer's grape." Silas's face fell. "But my dad, he always said they were special." Frank put a hand on his shoulder, a fatherly gesture. "Your dad was a fine man, but he wasn't a businessman. I can't sell these for you. Nobody will buy them." He paused. "I can give you 10 cents a pound for them. We'll grind them up, add them to hog feed supplement. The tannins are good for the hogs. 10 cents a pound." The words hung in the air. Pig feed. Silas looked at the crate. His grandfather's hands had built it. His father's hands had filled it. 3 days of his own sweat were in it. For pig feed. "No," he said. "Just no." Frank's expression hardened, just a little. The sympathy was replaced by professional certainty. "Listen to me, son. I'm trying to help you. That farm of yours is drowning in debt. You can't save it with nostalgia. You need to pull out those vines. Every last one. Plant cotton. Or soybeans. Something with a future. I'll extend you the credit for the seed myself, because I liked your father, and I don't want to see you lose everything." He believed every word he was saying. He was being kind. He was being practical. He was offering a lifeline. But Silas heard something else. He heard a door closing. He heard a final judgment on his father, on his grandfather, on the only thing he had left. He looked Frank Henderson in the eye. "Thanks for the offer," he said, "but I'll keep the vines." He turned and walked out of the co-op. He didn't take the money. He left the crate of grapes sitting on the concrete floor, a monument to a failed idea. Frank Henderson watched him go. He shook his head. "A damn shame," he thought. "The boy is his father's son. Too much pride, not enough sense." He had no idea what he had just set in motion. He had not offered a lifeline. He had drawn a battle line. Have you ever been told you couldn't do something? Not by an enemy, not by a rival, but by someone who genuinely believed they were protecting you. Someone who laid out all the sensible reasons for you to give up. Certainty about another person's capabilities, delivered with kindness. It is more damaging than outright hostility, because you cannot fight it with anger. You can only disprove it, and that takes decades of work. Tell me in the comments, has anyone ever tried to protect you from your own dream? Because what Silas did next was not born of anger. It was born of a quiet, unshakable resolve. He drove home in silence. The rattle of the old truck was the only sound. He felt a hollowness in his chest, not just disappointment, shame. Mr. Henderson was right. He was a respected man. He knew the business. Silas was just a kid with 2 acres of worthless grapes. He pulled into the farmyard. His grandfather was sitting on the porch swing. Elias Blackwood was 89 years old. His hands were gnarled like the muscadine trunks. His eyes were faded blue, but they saw everything. He watched Silas get out of the truck. He saw the slump in his shoulders. He didn't say a word. Silas sat down on the steps. He stared at the dirt. "I went to the co-op," he said. Elias nodded. "And?" "They won't buy the grapes. Mr. Henderson said, he said they're pig feed. He offered me 10 cents a pound." Silas's voice was barely a whisper. "He said I should pull the vines out, plant cotton." He expected his grandfather to sigh, to agree, to tell him to listen to the smart man with the college degree. Instead, Elias was silent for a long time. The sun was setting. The sky was turning orange and purple. Finally, he spoke. His voice was rough, like stones in a creek bed. "That man, Henderson, he knows numbers. He knows markets. He doesn't know the dirt." He pointed a trembling finger toward the vineyard. "They took your great-grandfather's mule in the Depression. They took my best 40 acres for the highway in '68. They took your father's health with their chemical loans. They can take everything, except the dirt. The dirt is enough." He stood up slowly. He walked over to Silas. He put a hand on his grandson's head. "That dirt knows who you are, son. The question is, do you?" And then he went inside. The words settled over Silas. The dirt is enough. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't a strategy. It was a statement of faith. Something shifted in him then. The shame washed away, replaced by something hard, something quiet, something that would last a lifetime. He stood up. He walked to the barn. He found his father's old pruning shears. They were rusty, but the steel was good. He spent an hour sharpening them on the whetstone. Sparks flew in the dim light. Then he walked out to the vineyard. The moon was rising. He started to work, pruning the dead wood, clearing the weeds, by hand, one vine at a time. He would not pull them out. He would bring them back to life. He didn't know how. He just knew he would. The dirt is enough. It became his mantra, his prayer, his entire business plan. The next 5 years were a quiet war, a war against debt, a war against doubt, a war against the sensible advice of good men. Silas got a job at the lumber mill, second shift, from 3 in the afternoon until 11 at night. His mornings belonged to the vines. He read every book he could find on viticulture, old books from the library. He learned that his grapes weren't just any Muscadines. They were a specific, forgotten cultivar, the Blackwood Scuppernong, named for his great-grandfather who had first planted them. They were smaller, with a higher skin-to-pulp ratio, which is why they were so tannic and so unpopular. But the book said that same quality made them incredibly resilient, drought-resistant, pest-resistant. They didn't need the expensive sprays and fertilizers the co-op sold. They just needed care. He learned to prune them in the old way his grandfather showed him. Not for maximum yield, but for maximum flavor. He trained the vines onto new trellises he built himself. He composted. He mulched. He worked. His hands became calloused. His body grew lean and hard. The neighbors watched. They saw his truck leave for the mill every afternoon. They saw his light on in the barn late at night. Some of them shook their heads. Poor kid's working himself to death for nothing. That's what pride gets you. Others watched with a different kind of expression. The older farmers. The ones who remembered Silas's grandfather. One day, his old tiller broke down, a vital piece of equipment. He didn't have the money to fix it. He sat on his porch, head in his hands, feeling the cold grip of failure. A truck pulled into his driveway. It was Mr. Abernathy, his neighbor to the south, a man in his 70s. He got out and walked over to Silas. "Heard you're having trouble," he said. Silas nodded, too tired to argue. Abernathy pointed to the back of his truck. "There's an old cultivator back there. It's mine. Engine's sound. Needs a new belt, but you're handy enough to fix that. You can use it. For as long as you need." Silas was stunned. I can't pay you for it, Mr. Abernathy." Abernathy waved a dismissive hand. "I'm not asking for pay. In the flood of '74, your father showed up with 3 of his cousins. They worked for 2 days straight helping me shore up my barn, never asked for a dime. He said we were neighbors." He looked Silas in the eye. "You just be a neighbor to someone else when your time comes." He got back in his truck and drove away. Silas realized he wasn't entirely alone. There was a different kind of economy at work here, one not based on dollars and cents, but on memory and respect. That first year, his harvest was small, just 50 baskets. He loaded them into his truck. He didn't drive to the co-op. He drove to the city farmers market. He set up a small table, a handwritten sign, "Old-timey Muscadine grapes." Most people walked by. They wanted seedless grapes, thin-skinned grapes. But a few older folks stopped. They'd taste one. Their eyes would light up. "My grandmother had a vine like this," they'd say. "I haven't tasted this flavor in 50 years. He sold every last grape. He made $243. It wasn't much, but it wasn't pig feed. It was a beginning. Year 2, he sold out again, made $500. Year 3, a woman who owned a small bakery bought his entire crop. She made muscadine jelly, the best jelly in the state, she said. She paid him $1,000, cash. He used it to pay down a piece of the debt. The bankers were surprised. Year 5, he bought a small, used grape press. He started making juice, unfiltered, unsweetened. It was a deep, dark purple. The flavor was intense, complex, not like any grape juice you could buy in a store. He bottled it himself, designed the labels. He sold it at the market alongside the grapes. He made $5,000 that year. He was still working at the mill, still tired all the time. But the hollowness in his chest was gone. It was replaced by a slow, burning fire. He was proving them wrong, not with words, with work. Every bottle of juice, every dollar of debt paid down, was a quiet answer to Frank Henderson's certainty. The dirt is enough. Let me tell you about the next 15 years, because this is where the story becomes bigger than one man and his farm. This is where quiet work starts to make a noise. By 2000, Silas had paid off the last of his father's debt. The farm was his, free and clear. He was 28 years old. He walked into the bank, the same bank that had nearly foreclosed on him. He handed the manager a cashier's check. He didn't say a word. He just watched the man stamp it paid in full. He quit his job at the lumber mill the next day. He was a full-time farmer now, his own man. In 2002, the 10-acre plot next to his came up for sale. He bought it. Cash. He didn't plant cotton. He didn't plant soybeans. He took cuttings from his grandfather's original vines, and he planted 2 more acres of blackwood scuppernongs. The neighbors who had laughed were starting to watch him differently. They saw the new tractor. They saw the new roof on the barn. They saw the steady stream of cars coming down his lane to buy his juice. Doubt was slowly turning into curiosity. Then, resentment. What's so special about his grapes? He's just lucky. He's got some fancy city customers, that's all. Frank Henderson saw him at the feed store sometimes. He'd nod, a polite, distant greeting. Silas would nod back. They never spoke of that day at the co-op, but it was always there, a ghost in the space between them. Frank saw Silas's success, but he saw it as an anomaly, an exception that proved the rule. He was happy for the boy in a way, but he still believed he had been right. Silas had gotten lucky. He hadn't built a sustainable business. By 2008, Silas owned 150 acres, all of it paid for. Cash. He had 5 full-time employees. His juice was being sold in specialty stores in 3 states. A food blogger wrote an article about him. The farmer who said no. The story went viral. Orders flooded in. He had to build a new processing facility. He hired a local contractor, used local lumber. He was becoming an economic engine for his small community. But he never joined the co-op. He bought his supplies elsewhere. He sold his products himself. He was self-sufficient. He didn't owe anyone. He didn't have to ask permission. That was the ultimate freedom. The freedom from the judgment of sensible men. By 2015, he was 43 years old. His hair had flecks of gray. His face was lined from the sun. He was a respected figure. People came to him for advice. Young farmers. People who wanted to get out of the commodity crop cycle. He'd walk them through his vineyard. He'd show them his books. He'd tell them his story. And he'd always end with the same words. The words his grandfather had given him. The dirt is enough. You have to trust it. More than you trust the market. More than you trust the experts. He was creating a quiet revolution. A return to small-scale, high-value agriculture. He wasn't just growing grapes. He was growing a new idea of what a farm could be. And all the while, Frank Henderson watched. From a distance. From behind the counter of his co-op. He saw the trucks with the Blackwood Farms logo. He saw the articles in the paper. He felt something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't anger. It was a slow, creeping doubt. A doubt in his own certainty. The world he understood, the world of subsidies and commodity prices and global markets, was being challenged by a man with 2 acres of forgotten grapes. It didn't make sense. It couldn't last. He kept waiting for Silas to fail, for the fad to end, for the world to return to normal. But it never did. Silas's success wasn't a fad. It was a foundation. And something new was about to be built on it. And that brings us back to 2022, to the co-op, to the young woman with the expensive shoes, to the number on the phone, $9 a pound. Frank Henderson felt a cold dread creep up his spine. He had built his life on being right, on understanding the market, on giving sound advice. That one number, $9, shattered it all. He had not been wrong by a little. He had been wrong by a factor of 90. He had looked at a gold mine and called it a hog trough. He cleared his throat. His voice was hoarse. "You'd have to talk to him," he said. "He doesn't do business with us." The woman nodded, as if she already knew. "Can you give me directions?" Frank wrote down the directions on a slip of paper. His hand was shaking. As the woman left, the silence in the co-op was deafening. His employees were looking at him. They had all heard. The story of Silas Blackwood was local legend, and Frank Henderson was always the man who got it wrong. For the first time in his life, he felt the full weight of that mistake. Not as a business error, but as a failure of imagination, a failure of respect. He closed the co-op early that day. He got in his truck. He drove out of town. He followed the same roads the woman had taken. He needed to see Silas. He needed to say something. He didn't know what, but he had to try. He pulled into the lane of Blackwood Farms. It was unrecognizable. The old house was restored, gleaming with new paint. The leaning barn was gone, replaced by a large, modern steel building. The fields were immaculate, rows and rows of healthy, vibrant vines. He saw Silas near the vineyard. He was talking to the young woman from the distillery. He looked older, calm, confident. He looked like a man who knew exactly who he was. Frank got out of his truck. He walked towards them. His heart was pounding. Silas saw him coming. His expression didn't change. He just waited. The young woman excused herself, heading back to her car, leaving the two men alone among the vines. Frank stopped a few feet from Silas. He looked at the gnarled trunks, the same vines he had told Silas to destroy 30 years ago. They were beautiful. He started. I saw that woman at the co-op. She told me about the gin, about the price. Silas nodded. He waited. Frank took a deep breath. I came out here to apologize, Silas. I was wrong that day. So very wrong. I hope you can forgive me. I was just a kid myself, trying to sound like I knew it all. I truly thought I was helping you. I didn't want to see you fail like your dad did. He waited for Silas to yell at him, to curse him, to tell him how much his certainty had cost him. But Silas did none of those things. He just looked at Frank. His eyes were clear. There was no anger in them, only a deep, quiet sadness. You weren't trying to help me, Mr. Henderson, he said. His voice was soft, but it cut through the air like a blade. You were trying to make me predictable. You looked at me and saw my father's son. You saw debt and struggle, and you put me in a box that made sense to you. You were certain about me, and a man can't afford to accept that kind of kindness. He paused. The cost wasn't the money I could have made. The cost was you looking at my father's life's work and calling it worthless. That's what I can't forget. Not because I'm angry, but because it taught me something important. The most dangerous people in the world are the ones who are sure they know your limits. He turned back to his vines. I have work to do, Mr. Henderson. It was a dismissal, quiet, polite, and utterly devastating. Frank Henderson stood there for a long time. He finally understood. He hadn't just made a mistake. He had committed a sin. The sin of certainty. He had tried to protect a young man from a risk, and in doing so, he had tried to rob him of his destiny. He walked back to his truck. An old man, a man who had been right his whole life, until the one time it mattered most. The story doesn't end there, because a true legacy isn't about proving one person wrong. It's about building a future for others. The contract with the distillery made Silas Blackwood a wealthy man. But he didn't buy a fancy car. He didn't build a bigger house. He created a foundation. He called it the Dirt is Enough Foundation. Its mission was simple: to provide grants to young farmers in the region. Farmers who wanted to grow heirloom crops. Farmers who wanted to farm organically. Farmers who had an idea that the co-op would laugh at. He didn't just give them money, he gave them his time, his knowledge, his support. He taught them how to find their own niche, how to build a business from the ground up, without debt, without dependency. He was teaching them how to be free. Today, his county is known for more than just cotton and soybeans. It's known for artisanal cheeses, for heritage breed livestock, for heirloom vegetables sold to restaurants in the city. Silas Blackwood didn't just save his farm. He created a new agricultural economy. He proved that value isn't determined by a commodity market. It's determined by quality, by story, by a connection to the land. He turned what was once a weakness of his region, its stubborn attachment to the old ways, into its greatest strength. In the old barn on Silas's farm, there is a wall of photographs. His grandfather, his father, the farm in its early, struggling days. But in the center of the wall, there is an object, hanging from two iron hooks. It is an old, splintered wooden crate. The stenciled letters of the Blackwood name are faded but still visible. It's the crate he took to the co-op in 1992, the one he left behind. Years later, when the co-op was cleaning out a storage room, one of the workers found it. He knew the story. Everyone did by then. He brought it out to Silas. Now it hangs on the wall, a reminder, not of failure, but of a beginning. A reminder of what happens when you refuse to let someone else tell you what you are worth. Sometimes, his granddaughter, a girl of 10, will come into the barn. She'll stand in front of the crate. She'll trace the faded letters with her small finger. And she'll ask him to tell her the story again. The story of the pig feed that became gold. And he tells her. He always tells her. Because he wants her to know. He wants her to carry it in her bones. The world will try to tell you who you are. It will offer you sensible advice. It will draw a circle around you to keep you safe. Your job is not to argue. Your job is not to fight. Your job is to do the work, to tend your own soil, to trust what grows there, and to patiently, quietly prove that their circle was always too small. Right now, somewhere in the world, a young person with a dream is being told no. They're being told to be realistic, to be sensible, to give up on the worthless, thick-skinned, inconvenient things they love. They are being offered 10 cents a pound for their soul. This story is for them. If you know someone like that, someone who is fighting a quiet battle against the certainty of others, share this story with them. Remind them that the work is long, the fight is lonely, but the dirt is enough. Thank you for listening. And don't forget to subscribe, because there are more stories that need to be told.